Well, hello there, and welcome to another edition of Warbird Wednesday. My name is Fred Bell. I am the vice chairman of the Palm Springs Air Museum. Today, you could also, Greg, a deal's a deal. I will wear a hat. This was the COVID deal, but as you can see, I'm giving you the full view here. I'm French vanilla today. Thank you, Greg. This has to be probably, maybe not if the most difficult, but one of the most difficult hats you've ever put me in. So I'm going to go ahead and get this off here. Oh, that was exciting. So I'll go ahead and fix my hair. We're going to toss this off camera. So today we're talking about the Laurier and the Olivier, the LeO, the 451, which is a French medium bomber. Now, I'm going to refer to it as the 451 because I'm not going to continue to try to even attempt to make the French pronunciation on that. But as I said, Greg had turned me into French vanilla, so I'm trying to get my composure back here. This was a French medium bomber that was ordered right at the beginning of the war and saw limited combat, but like most French types, stood on both sides, Allies and the Axis. Did not have, again, like most French types, much impact on the outcome of the war. But nonetheless, because of the storied French history in French aviation, we need to talk about these airplanes. So the 451 was the brainchild of designer Pierre Mercier. I'll throw up a plan view of the airplane. So here's a plan view of the airplane. This is in the geometry of these twins, all these twins that we saw, these medium bombers. It is comparable to other medium bombers at the time, 300-mile-an-hour speed. So it was really pretty quick. If you think about, we've talked about some of those fighters. You know, the fighters had 320, 350-mile-an-hour speed limitations. As the war went on, obviously, a 300-mile-an-hour medium bomber was not in good company with these top line, especially European fighters that were easily going over 400 miles an hour. Comparable aircraft on this would have been the A-20, the Heinkel, the 111, the Ju-88, and the Amiot 354. Find that one, Greg, the Amiot, the 354. The first flight of this airplane was in 1937. It was introduced in 1938, and it was retired in 1957. There were 561 of these built. As the airplane rolled out, it rolled out in 1937. The French initial order, by the way, was for 749 of these airplanes. As I said, there were only 561 of them built. There were 10 prototypes that rolled out in the Battle of France. That also, of the 10 prototypes that flew combat missions, what were they? One of these was the first French combat loss of the war. So immediately one of them was shot down. In the Battle of France, there were 47 of the type lost in combat. 26 were to fighters and 21 were to AAA fire. So fairly even ratio. A lot of these bombers, as we go on in the war, would be lost, especially on the American side, were lost much more to fighter screens. And we've talked about the potent nature of German fighters at that point. But remember, the Germans in the Battle of France were focused on what, Greg? They weren't focused on point defense at that time. They weren't focused on people going into Germany. They were attacking outward, and they did not have the early warning chain set up that they had later in the war. Of course, somebody will say, well, they had the Siegfried line. They did have the Siegfried line, but that didn't necessarily come with the chain radars and the things that they had later in the war when they were getting attacked by the Americans and the British with those huge bomber raids, and they were able to vector in these aircraft. So early on, a lot of these aircraft, these French aircraft would get down very low. Their idea was to come in very low and bomb. They did have the ability to deploy a dorsal gun on this, but they didn't do it very much. And they also didn't deploy this top gun very much because it impacted their speed, this top turret. So they went in very fast, and they got out. Now, they also, right at the beginning of the war, attacked Italy. So they were involved in the conflict against Italy when Italy came in on the war on the Axis. At the end of the day, there were 452 of these built, 373 were in service. Now, this is an interesting combat statistic. There were 130 of these aircraft lost in the Battle of France. So think about those combat losses. 373 built. There were about a quarter of the fleet were lost in combat, a little bit more than that. Now, the one thing I want to do today is talk about these French air crews that came over and fought for the British. The thing, and the one thing that we miss, and we had two things that happened when Dunkirk fell and France fell. There were actually a lot of French national soldiers that came over as well and got out of France. Not as many as probably should have, but the British were doing everything they could to evacuate the expeditionary force. But there were French forces that also evacuated to Britain at that time, and there were also French pilots. A number of French pilots flew their aircraft over and fought with the RAF. The RAF needed every pilot that it could get at that time. So it is not fair to forget those. Those folks have kind of been swept under the rug in history. And I think today the salute I want to cover is all of those folks that were displaced and were Free French forces. They went back in with de Gaulle, and you can clearly see that in D-Day. Those folks either came from two areas. They either came from North Africa, right, when they surrendered in North Africa, or they made it across the Channel, and they were in force. So today I want to salute all of those Frenchmen that went and fought on the side of the Allies after France was defeated. And today what I'm going to do it is with Cafello. Cafello. This is an espresso coffee soda. Now, this is kind of more Italian than French. Maybe a little French there. But clearly, it is 92 calories. There's no pure cane sugar marketing on this. I always see that. Let's see here. I don't see any sugar in this, Greg. What have you given me here? This could be kind of frightening. I'm going to go ahead. It's cold. Oh, Greg. There is no fizz or nothing there. Definitely a coffee aroma. But you know what? Would you carbonate an espresso? But it's a soda. So you would think, does it have a return bottle? This one is a little suspect. I mean, this was dead as a doornail. All right, so I can't tell when this was bottled. It is a product, Deerfield Beach, Florida. Okay, so somebody can go out to cafello.com and figure out when this thing was bottled. But premium sparkling coffee. So that would tell me that there's carbonation in this, pal. All right, Greg. That's a deal's a deal. I'm going to do one more. There is a little carbonation there. Just a touch. It's not terrible. It is not. In fact, I'll have one more. It's not terrible, but the one thing I would say about, what's a comparable taste on this? Greg, have you ever had cold coffee, sitting on the dresser and you've left it and it's cold? That's pretty much what it is. So it's not something that would be on my palate, but I would say I think there was enough of a sparkling nature to that hopefully it wasn't too botulistic in nature. I don't know if that's a term from my inkhorn assistant. I'm getting into the word a little late, but I got it. It was the coffee helmet that you had me wearing, I think, that threw me off. So these aircraft continued to fight on with the Vichy French. Now, the interesting thing about is the Germans actually operated 39 of these. They captured them, they repurposed them, and they operated them during the war. They used them, though, for totally in transport duties, which is interesting if you think about how hard-pressed the Germans were for tactical aircraft, especially later in the war, that they didn't use them for anything else. But they basically cannibalized them, used them as spares, and eventually probably they went by the wayside. So after the war, 67 of these aircraft continued to be operated primarily in training roles when they were finally phased out in 1957. Now, the interesting thing, Greg, is that this aircraft was the last pre-war design that was operated by the French from World War II. So it was one of the sole survivor, or the sole survivor, once it got past, got very long in the tooth. How do you want to talk about that? So now the interesting thing, you want to talk about the converse of that, which is interesting. I cannot find, and if you know in the comment section and you know where one of these are at, you would think they were out until 1957 that there would be some sitting around. I can't find one. So if you can find one at home, let me know that there's one in a museum. I find that hard to believe, and it's just that I always go out and try to look for that kind of stuff, and I can't find one of these anywhere in a museum. Maybe it's just I didn't look in the right place, but if you know of one, put it in the comment section. I would be surprised why there wouldn't be one of these flying, although the only issue you would have is maybe spares. You know, the engines, you always have a problem with spares with these types of things. But this is like all of the other French airplane with the catastrophe of the war. What ended up happening is there was this huge interruption, and then basically the French went, okay, we're just going to go back to doing business. And like with the fighters and anything else, they basically brought a few of them back in and continued to operate them until they could bring in other aircraft from either the British or the Americans as stopgap airplanes until they got their own Air Force up to speed again. So it was a good airplane at the time. You know what it reminds me of a little bit? A PV-2. Looks a lot to me like a PV-2. I don't know why. Maybe I'm a PV-1, but that kind of bulky shape with the kind of bullet nose. So if you want to give the gift of history, we're on another book today, and we've covered this one, I think, before. I've seen it before, but this one is actually the story of World War II. Now, this is a serious coloring book. I mean, this is for Greg after he's had a little cappuccino, you know, and he's got a clear head and he wants to color historic situations from World War II. This is an interesting one. This actually has the fall of France with two very, I think, demoralized French soldiers standing in front of a very pleased looking German soldier. So obviously he's happy that he was the victor. Ultimately, the French would have the last laugh, but if you would like one of those, go out and click on the link, and Jason will fire a coloring book off to you immediately, and you can color your own World War II battle scenes. But go out to the link and pick that up. Now, we cannot, Greg, do these restorations like this B-25, Mitch the Witch behind me. One of the Pond Collection airplanes is undergoing heavy maintenance right now, but we cannot do these restorations and rebuild these airplanes without your generous support. So send us a couple of francs, will you? A couple of francs? Not the hot dog kind, the spendy kind. Maybe a baguette. I'm not a humorist, Greg. I know I'm going to have people go, you're not very funny, cut it out. So I'm not going to go any further with that. If you come across us on YouTube and you like airplanes, all we do is airplanes. Not as slick a production as Greg as I would like, but we do a lot of interesting airplanes, one a week. If you like that, give the gift of Warbird Wednesday to a friend. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like us on Facebook. My name is Fred Bell. I am the Vice Chairman of the Palm Springs Air Museum. Have a great day.